Alright. Yeah, what up, dudes? Today I decided to throw hands with the developers of Marvel Rivals themselves. As you already know, since you probably read the title, I redesigned a few of the already existing Marvel Rivals characters and turned them either into new roles or just improved their current ones. But for this video, to keep it a little more polarizing, I decided to reinvent them all in new roles. But I think I've wasted enough of your time. Let's get to our first redesign.
Are you out of your damn mind?
Now, redesigning Blade was a must. He's not a terrible DPS, let me just make that very clear. I've always been a believer that Blade should have been a tank. He's a vampire, at least a daywalker, that's immune to dying by any mortal means, or vampire means, which means he's essentially unkillable outside of a very thin gray area. And yeah, his name is Blade, but honestly his blade is the weakest part of his kit currently. And while I was kind of breaking down the parts of his kit that I liked the best and that I thought really made it interesting as a duelist, everything that I came across could only be improved by making him into a vanguard. And just because I know someone's gonna say something about it in the comments, because I've seen dozens of these shorts already. Sure, he's fast and he cuts down hordes of vampires before breakfast every morning, but all of these things also apply to Thor. I mean, when Thor was a kid, or at least whatever a kid version of a god is, he absolutely decimated the frost giant population. He single-handedly has speed blitzed some of the fastest characters in the Marvel Universe, come back and forth across the universe enough times using Mjolnir, and not to mention that Blade is definitely slower and weaker than Thor. I don't think that's even nearly close. Thor is significantly faster and stronger than Blade, and has much greater feats that would mean that he can deal more damage, which should mean that he's a duelist. But he isn't, because he's tough as shit, just like Blade. And another big reason I don't think Blade fits in with the other duelists is because there's just so damn many. I mean, with the sheer amount we have currently, there is not much room for a new duelist to really make a stand. I mean, breaking it down, if you want a melee character who uses their sword to get in close and dish out some damage, you have Magic. Magic does it, especially in this current patch, Magic does it exponentially better than Blade. If you want to poke a character with Blade's gun, well, you could do Bucky. And Bucky does more damage, you don't have to find that perfect gray area to deal damage, and he's also got CC stuns. And arguably my favorite part of Blade's kit, his reduced healing effect that he applies when he dashes into people with his gun, I think it's actually really good. I've been a proponent against anti-heal for the longest time, because at least the way it was implemented in Overwatch, it allows you to click one button and instantly remove 2 supports from the game until they added Kiriko, which essentially was them just making a problem so they could make a solution. And now, much like a lot of Overwatch players, I hate Kiriko, but maybe I'll have a rant post about hating Overwatch characters too. But Blade using reduced healing instead of anti-healing, I think is a great way around it. If you are using triple support, that reduced healing effect can still be countered. So you can really go high healing comps in order to get around it. But that's the counterplay. There's no counterplay to anti-heal until they add cleansing. But I've yapped way too long already. Let's get into his actual abilities. First big change, Blade no longer has a secondary primary weapon. Instead, his primary weapon is only Dracula's sword. His primary fire is now just a melee sword swipe that I would like to act kind of like Magic's, where there's like a sweeping effect to it, but a closer resemblance would be to a Reinhardt, where you can kind of drag it around and the hitbox will move with you so you can hit multiple people with it. Not quite to the effect of Mr. Fantastic, but if you've ever played Reinhardt, then you kind of know what I'm talking about. But I would like Blades to have a little bit more finesse and move a little bit faster. Similar to how his attacks work now, just a little bit broader since he would have to be just a slight bit bulkier. Moving on to his secondary fire, we have Hunter's shotgun. This is a close range blast where the shrapnel lodges into the enemy's chest, and after a second it burns white hot and then explodes. Now this would not reload in the normal sense, this would naturally come back to you in a similar way to how the Human Torch works. However, and where the kind of playstyle I imagined for this tank Blade would come in, you can interweave this gunshot like how you would melee weave with most characters, where you can slash and immediately pull out your gun and shoot, canceling the slashing animation. Or maybe even you could melee cancel it into a secondary. That could be kind of cool. Either way, the secondary effect of this gun, to allow you to reload it a little bit quicker, is that every time you land a sword strike, you immediately gain ammo back, similar to how Thor's Thor Force works, where it's not necessarily every strike, but once his hammer glows blue, you get a Thor Force back if you hit. So I'd like to see something similar where like maybe the sword will like flash red and then you hit and it gives you the shot back immediately, making it into a playstyle where you want to weave in as many shotgun blasts as you want to melt people down or at least scare them off. Oh, and it's at this point that I want to stop and mention I wanted to try to keep some of the existing kit alive within this rewrite, so I'm not just completely reimagining the character. So there will be some very similar names or abilities, some that will go completely unchanged, that I would just like to see within this new reimagining. With that said, getting into his first real ability, we have Scarlet Shroud. This is where Blade holds up his sword to reduce his incoming damage by 80%. None of that has changed from how he originally works now. However, if he parries the attack, meaning if he blocks last second, then he can actually deflect whatever projectile is coming at him, giving it to the enemy. For his second ability, we have Speed Blitz. This is where Blade dashes forward, piercing through enemies, dealing damage, and applying a bleed effect that deals percent base damage in 2 major bursts. This would act in a similar vein to how magic works in her ultimate, but this would not be nearly as flashy or loud. Moving on to his third ability, we have Blood Hunt. This is a toggleable ability similar to what he has now, where he gains additional movement speed and attack speed. However, instead of immediately gaining reduced healing, during this time a meter at the center of his screen starts to tick down very quickly if he does not deal damage while in this state. The lower it gets, the worse his reduced healing is. While at 100%, he does not have reduced healing. However, I think it would be a very quick drop off between 100 and like 90 or 80. Additionally, during this time, the use of his Speed Blitz reduces the healing of all enemies hit in a similar way to how his current dash with his gun works, where you bump into someone and then they gain reduced healing for a few seconds. However, this would apply it to multiple people as you pierce through. For his passive, I didn't change it too much, but I did tweak a couple things. We have Daywalker's Hunger. This is where Eric receives a lifesteal from all the damage that he deals in the form of overshields. This can go over his maximum HP for 200 extra health. I always found it weird when it came to lifesteal in Overwatch. Reaper just dealt the damage, but Blade had to activate a form with reduced healing in order to do it, and then his lifesteal is not even half as good as Reaper's. But either way, I think this little change could even make Duelist Blade a lot better. Now finally, for his ultimate, Monster's Nightmare. This is where Blade dashes forward, piercing through enemies and giving them all a frightened effect. I would like to see this work like a flipped Emma Frost ultimate, forcing the enemies to move in the opposite direction of Blade for the duration of the ultimate. Additionally, a frightened character deals reduced damage to Blade and his allies. Now they can still move and fight as normal, however, any attempt to move towards Blade instead backs them up. And I don't know necessarily how you'd code this. I've never made a game. I don't know how hard this would be to code, but I would love to see even movement abilities used in the direction of Blade, move them backwards and like shoot them against the wall. Or maybe movement abilities would be the exception, where you can use that to get close, and then you just gotta pray you're within range now. So let me know if you've got any different names in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. Also, whatever you think these characters' voice lines would be, if they would change. Personally, I don't want Blade's voice line to change. It's badass. But either way, let me know what you think about this new Blade. I kind of see him taking a bit more of a brawl style. I especially think a lot of the things that people don't necessarily think Blade is very good at as a duelist could make him an exceptional Vanguard. Like a tank with lifesteal is already an interesting concept because then they don't need to have excess amounts of health, kind of like what Angela is trying to do with her brawl state when she lands on the ground. But either way, a lifesteal Vanguard that also can move very quickly and is supposed to be all up in your face the entire time, I think could be very fun. I especially like the idea of using this Blade to dash straight through the enemy team into their backline, and then quick 180 ult, and then dash back through all of them again, making them frightened. Or maybe even the reverse, where you start in their backline, dash through, dash back, forcing them to be walking into your team. I personally really like this kit a lot more than our current Blade, being able to interweave sword strikes with gunshots. I think that's so cool, and I'm kind of upset we didn't get to do it with our current Blade. Now with Blade complete, I am legally obligated to get onto the one requested by my girlfriend.
You in one army?
Now with Doreen, I really had to get creative, especially since I didn't want to remove everything about her kit and just make her put up big walls made out of thousands of squirrels like Ratatouille. And I also wanted to keep a lot of the parts of her kit that make her unique, especially her little acorn that she consumes in order to regain any of her abilities, or the little slingshot. I really don't feel like that slingshot should be this hard to balance, but NetEase seems to think that it is. So getting into it, for her primary fire, I decided to keep it as her slingshot acorn lob. This is a similar primary fire to what she has now, but with each individual bounce that the acorn does, it loses a significant amount of damage, making direct hits suck. For her second primary fire, we have the Nut Buster. This is a spiked flail made out of acorns that she uses for a melee swiping attack. This also applies an effect onto enemies that improves the effectiveness of her Squirrel Brigade, an ability we'll get to in a moment. For her secondary fire, we have Tail Block. This is where Doreen swings her tail out in front of her and blocks all incoming damage for a certain HP amount, in a very similar way to how Captain America's shield works. Instead of a reflect, while her tail block is active, and if her tail block's HP breaks, her tail goes back behind her, and then any of her Squirrel Brigade will instantly find the closest enemy to her and target them if that's their job. Once again, that will make sense in a moment. Now for her first real ability, we have the Nut House. This is where a Squirrel Girl pulls out a golden nut and then buries it into the ground like that one rodent from Ice Age. The top of it is still very noticeable and sticks out, shining and glowing. While this is buried, all summons and an AoE around it cannot receive damage until that nut is destroyed. I made it golden and shiny so that it stands out a lot and so that it's very easily seen, and because I had the thought just now, I wouldn't say that you'd be able to put like a penny nest on top of it to make it harder to hit. That also could be really funny and a really good strat, so who knows. And we're finally getting to Squirrel Brigade, and the real bread and butter behind her kit, what I really wanted to focus on anyway. This is where Doreen can summon up to 3 Squirrel Soldiers wherever she can see. There are 3 types of Squirrel Soldier: Gunner, Blockade, and Medic. The Gunner shoots like any turret you know would. Blockades have a shield out in front of them, have a lot more HP, and they stop movement abilities if they're hit by them. And finally, medics are just turrets that shoot out stims into allies, focusing the ones with the least health first. These can be picked up at any time and will not start the cooldown. However, if they're destroyed, then you must wait until the cooldown is complete to place another. I would like for it to be HP based, where if they're at 100 health or 100% health, then you can just immediately put them down again. But if they're almost broken, then maybe you have to wait a couple seconds. But for her final ability, we have the Repleninut. This is where Squirrel Girl commands Tippy Toe to jump onto an ally and give them a second use of any of their abilities. This lasts for a few seconds before expiring if they do not use it. So it's something you'd want to talk to your team about and tell them, hey, I'm going to give this to you so you can have an additional dash, or so you can have an additional boost, or whatever ability you think would be needed in the moment. But overall, I wanted this to be more of a team helping ability, where maybe your supports are getting dove, you can't quite get to them in time, so you can give them the Repleninut, so that, say it's Luna Snow, she missed her freeze, now she has a second freeze that she can use. And obviously there's an evil side to this, where you can give Luna Snow 2 freezes and she can just freeze the same person for the full duration twice, or Hulk can exile someone. But overall, I just like the idea of having a tank that can give you a second use of your abilities if you communicate properly. Onto her passive, we have Tail Spring. This is her current ability where she can hit space mid-air to spring herself into the air. Now onto her ultimate, my personal favorite thing I changed about this kit, we have Ratatosker Rampage. This is where Doreen pulls out a glowing runic acorn, crushes it, summoning Ratatosker as she saddles up and charges forward. While charging, Doreen can skewer her enemies on top of Ratatosker's horn and hurl them at any time during the ultimate. However, they are automatically thrown at the end. No, I absolutely love this ability, but let me know what you think about the ability down in the comments below. I wanted to really get unique with a Squirrel Girl ultimate, since I know everybody is always so angry at the little flock of squirrels that Tippy Toe commands to charge forth. Now with that finished, I think I did a fantastic job harnessing the power of Squirrel Girl and transmuting that into a Vanguard kit, and kind of fixing her primary fire in my opinion. But either way, this next character is someone who I really just think should have been a Vanguard from the start, and I honestly don't really know why she isn't.
Stop. Sue, stop. It's too much.
Get pressured!
Sue, stop.
Save our son!
Literally all of her abilities are just creating shields, pushing things, and turning invisible. I get tweaking characters to fit the strategist role because at the end of the day, most of Marvel characters were not made with hero shooters in mind. But she already had access to shields, CC abilities, and not to mention how awesome an invisible Vanguard could be. I just think she fit the Vanguard role so perfectly, but I don't really get why they decided to make her a strategist. Especially since most of her healing abilities are just stuff they made up for her. And you could have done that for anyone. However, I want to get into her primary fire, Orb Projection. This is the exact same primary fire she has now, however, it does not heal anymore, and the final attack has a slight knockback. Her secondary fire, or right click, is Fantastic Fortification. This is where she puts up a massive shield similar to Reinhardt or Strange, but enemies cannot cross the barrier. For her first ability, we have Wall of Force. This is where she sends a shield forward until it hits a wall, shattering. Now this wall also goes under the same effect as the Fantastic Fortification, where enemies cannot walk through it, meaning the wall will push them, and if they're collided against the wall, they take a massive burst of damage. This would be very similar to Symmetra's wall if you played very early. Now for her second ability, we have Invisible Physics. By holding shift, you can continuously push or pull an enemy. The same way her ability works right now, but just instead of it being a one-time big push or big pull, instead now it would just be a continuous pull that gets stronger and stronger the longer it's on someone. So if Black Panther dives your backline and you try to pull him back to stay in that backline after he tries to escape, and you, instead of just missing the initial grab and being screwed, now you can kind of bend it over and continue to pull him, and maybe he still gets away, but at least this way you can kind of utilize it a little bit more. I wouldn't necessarily say this is a better ability than what she currently has, mostly because I don't play Invis enough to really know. Overall, I think this was just a more interesting way because I wanted to change things up, but this is an ability I wanted to keep. And for her third ability, we have Shield Split. While holding up her Fantastic Barrier, she can hit this button to make it shrink and lose a percentage of health, but form a personal shield in front of an ally that moves with them, or she can put this on an enemy to block their attacks. I especially like the idea of putting it in front of an enemy, because then anytime they shoot or punch forward, I mean, obviously melee characters would punch through the shield. I just like thinking about it like if Iron Man is ulting and you hear maximum pulse, and then you just put the shield in front of him and forget about him. I think that's just so funny to me. But that also could be a little busted, so I could definitely see them not going with that. Now on to her passive, we have the Invisible Woman. This simply allows Sue to naturally turn invisible and start recovering HP if she does not deal or take damage for a few seconds. And additionally, by holding space midair, she can put a force field underneath her that allows her to walk on the air, but enemies can destroy it. Now for her ultimate, we have Translucent Tower. I wanted to keep this in a similar look to her original ultimate. However, this time around, when she selects an area, she can cloak all enemies inside of it, just like she does now. But while inside, all of her allies have a personal shield that constantly regenerates HP. And additionally, now I do want to clarify real quick, because I talk about shields a lot with this kit, I do mean the blue health shields, not a actual shield in front of them like her secondary fire. Because if Sue puts her shield split onto an ally during this time, shooting through that barrier or through her Fantastic Fortification wall will up the damage of that projectile. All right, that's going to wrap up all of our tank rewrites. Let me know what you think down below. Think if there's anything I should have added or should have kept from the original kit. I'd love to hear your feedback on these. And I think that there's a lot of potential here, especially with certain characters that should have probably just been in other roles, but they didn't feel like it for whatever reason. But anyways, let's rock right into our strategists, starting with someone who I personally believe should have always had a strategist kit. So sorry, but before we get into our strategist, I really quickly just want to say thank you all so much for the support. We were just on the border of hitting 600 subscribers, and that is just a fascinating thing to me. And I just want to really quickly say thank you to everyone who watches these videos. Even if you aren't subscribed, I still appreciate you watching the video and liking the video. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Let's get into our first strategist. All right. Now hear me out and let me guide your imagination for a second. Imagine if instead of being a baby diva ripoff, Bruce instead had an entire support kit, allowing him to help the team by healing while he's not the Hulk. And when he gains his ult back, he becomes a Vanguard again. I think that would make Banner such an interesting and fun character, and it would open the door to actually have people main Banner without the Hulk as a real comp, and not whatever that was that I saw on TikTok this afternoon. But let's get into his abilities. Now for Bruce, I have Gamma Beam. Now this will be very similar to my She-Hulk kit if you watched that, because I think I forgot to say this in the video, but in my mind, I always thought that Banner would have made the She-Hulk kit that I gave her in that video. So he would have made the same gamma beams that he uses. So that's why these are going to be very similar. Banner's primary fire, Gamma Beam, allows Banner to fire a beam of gamma energy from his wrists that lock onto allies and healing them while building up his passive. And I'll go ahead and get into it because it's very important for the rest of his kit. Geiger Meter. This is where Banner slowly builds up a meter in the center of his screen that he can use to expend on his abilities. So essentially by healing, he gains points that he can spend on the rest of his abilities. There's only one that does not use one, and we'll get to that one in a minute. For his secondary fire, we have Atomic Shield. This is where Banner projects a shield mimicking the dimensional effects of the Green Door, allowing him to absorb projectiles, and it can be held up as long as you have some of your meter charged. However, all the damage that it takes will slowly trickle away at that meter. So technically you can hold it up endlessly as long as it doesn't take damage. For his first ability, we have Gamma Grenade. This is the thing that I wanted to keep from Banner's kit because it's his entire kit. This is where Banner hurls a gamma-infused grenade, detonating and dealing slight damage and healing to the area, but it leaves the ground irradiated, giving allies within it passive healing and enemies become slowed. And for his second ability, we have Rad Zone. This is where Banner twists the gamma core on his belt, using all of his Geiger Meter as it expels into small AoE bursts around him, larger the more meter you have. Now in 3 bursts of damage. Now, I like to think about this taking like around 35 charge per burst of healing and damage. And then there's also a passive healing that happens from taking just a % off your Geiger Meter for the activation. Now, if an enemy is hit by 2 of these bursts, then they gain a reduced healing effect for a few seconds. But it refreshes if a third hit hits them, making it last significantly longer. Maybe if they're hit by enough of these, then it would turn into full anti-healing. And I think that could work pretty cool, especially with this being an AoE around Banner, so they'd have to be pretty close to him. I just didn't want this to turn into something that Banner charges up, activates, and then just bombs into and then just jumps into the center of the enemy team and just chases them down like that while everyone else just pumps him full of healing. Either way, we need to get onto his third ability, Rad Pulse. This is where Banner charges his gauntlets together, takes up 20% of his total meter, and fires a piercing sound waves that heals allies and then bounces back to him like a boomerang. Now the amount that this heals is entirely based off of that 20%. So if you're at 100, they'd basically go up to max health again. But if you're at like 10, then it's gonna barely heal them at all. And since we already went by his passive at the beginning, we have his ultimate, Gamma Monster. This is where Banner transforms into the Hulk. Now at this point, I could just say he takes on his entire Vanguard kit and continues from there. But since this is a reimagining and a bit of a rewrite, I decided to tweak it and have him go straight to Monster Hulk in a way. So this Hulk would be normal, not Monster Hulk, but for the purposes of our universe that we are currently in, it is the equivalent of Monster Hulk. Either way though, while the Gamma Monster, Banner gains immense health like he would in Monster Hulk form, as he starts to radiate gamma healing all around him, keeping your Geiger Meter at 100% and you charge it constantly. Now during this time, your primary fire switches over away from a gamma beam and into just a swiping attack like how Hulk normally has. Now during this time, you have immense amounts of health. I mean, you can kind of take over in the Vanguard position during this time and keep everyone up around you. Additionally, you could use Rad Pulse at 100% constantly to keep everyone up if that healing is not enough, or if there's an enemy DPS ult going on. So it still has that chance to save people. And then Rad Zone, you could constantly keep that on, allowing you to just pump out even more healing around you. I do love the idea of a massive Hulk slamming down in front of you, and then he just pulls out a giant green glowing shield and like summons it in front of him. Because technically that would be the case here with the secondary fire. I don't know. Something about that just sounds so fun to me. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. I have always wondered why Banner does not have any strategist abilities, since he would fit the role perfectly. And it just feels odd for Marvel Rivals to rip off Diva this hard, because Banner is interesting. As much as people make fun of it, he is very interesting, so traumatic. But in that, he would be a perfect strategist. Even if you didn't want to give him this entire kit, making his primary fire also heal allies so he can get his ult back faster and become a Vanguard again. I just think it would make him more interesting than just being Baby Diva minus. Either way, with Banner calmed down, I think it's time to get into the only character in Marvel Rivals that I have any genuine hatred towards.
X-Men! No longer am I the woman you knew. I am life incarnate. I am Phoenix!
Now, I don't hate Jean at all for what her kit actually is, but what I do hate about her is that her entire kit is just hella premium. Or, as I like to say, her entire kit is just hella with a grenade attachment. Instead of actually diving into anything that would make Jean interesting as a both insanely powerful telepath and also the bearer of the Phoenix Force. They literally just copy and pasted Hela's kit and then swapped her passive to activate every third hit instead of on a kill. Oh, and they gave her 2 movement abilities. So I redesigned her as a strategist. Oh, and another thing, they didn't give Phoenix any rebirth ability, any of them. The character Phoenix, the whole point of a Phoenix is rebirth. It's what it symbolizes. Anyway, I redesigned her as a strategist. For a primary fire, we have transmutive healing. This is where Jean telepathically heals allies via a beam in a very similar vein to Emma, only much wider. This does not track allies. However, in a very similar way to Emma, it does get stronger the more it heals. Now onto her secondary fire, we have Cosmic Flames, a piercing percent-based flamethrower that builds up a spark on enemies. Now I completely changed what sparks mean on enemies. But while sparked, enemies take damage over time. This damage over time heals Phoenix, and enemies deal reduced melee damage. I also don't know what it is with so many hero shooters and just not wanting to follow in Team Fortress 2's footsteps, not making pyro. Like, just give us a flamethrower. Even Overwatch hasn't done it. I really thought Johnny was gonna have a flamethrower, but I don't mind his kit that much. Onto her first ability, we have Dark Ascent. Now I did keep this ability because I made the stipulation of at least having to keep one ability from the original kit. I tweaked it slightly though, where Phoenix dashes in a direction she's moving and becomes a flying character for a moment. Onto her second ability, we have Telepathic Illusion. This is where Jean uses her telepathy to create a double of herself, and upon being damaged, it explodes, causing any enemy hit by the blast to see every character on the screen as the enemy Jean for a few seconds. Meaning, if they shoot their teammate who they think is the enemy Jean, then that teammate will take damage. Additionally, I would like to see that this is either utilized like how the Magneto team up with Emma Frost is, where it's a secondary who just pops out the side of her. I feel like that was the weakest way to do it. How I would personally like to see it done is have it be a placeable double in a similar way to a Loki clone. But onto her third ability, we have Mental Scramble. This is where Jean fires a psychic projectile that pierces enemies, and if it hits them, it swaps their keybinds around randomly with the exception of their ultimate. Now, I would like to see that this is the keybinds they have currently active, so just mixing around WASD, space, your Shift, E, F, like those sort of buttons, your V, and then you have to either look under the right side of your screen and see what your abilities are, but you also have to find out what your forward button is. But I like the idea of Jean being able to scramble someone's mind and make them think they're stepping forward when in reality they're jumping or something like that. It's just a cool way to use telepath abilities, in my opinion. And the reason I excluded the ultimate from this is in the off chance that if the thing is just walking forward and they get hit by Mental Scramble, I wouldn't want them to then hit W not realizing they've been hit yet, and then that activate their ultimate. So I feel like Q should stay ultimate button. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I really like this ability and I think it could be really fun. Onto her passive, we have Eruptive Potential. This is where Jean's cosmic power expels out of her upon being eliminated, making any enemy around her take damage and gain a spark, and allies in this area regain some HP. Onto her ultimate, we have Phoenix Champions. This is where Jean merges with the Phoenix and explodes out in an AoE, putting a spark on enemies in the area and granting allies a new effect that gives them both constant healing and a damage buff. Additionally, if they hit a character with a spark, then they can help Phoenix build up a new ultimate during this time, which allows her to erupt out again and revive any fallen allies in the AoE. Now, to kind of clear up some things in case that was confusing to anyone, in a similar way to how Hulk works, when Monster Hulk activates, he automatically has a second ultimate ability where he can do the Loki slam thing, like he did in Avengers. However, for this, she would be able to build it up fairly quickly as long as her ultimate is currently active. So now to close off the video, I feel like I saved the best for last. Possibly the most toxic kit for a game like this to have ever been developed, and I honestly hate how this character is designed. Not because it's bad or it's annoying or it always kills me, but just because the kit is designed so that either the player does not get to play or the enemy team does not get to react. So if there is one character that I believe more than anyone deserves a redesign, it is...
What's up? I never yielded! And as you can see, I am not dead!
Black Panther is a character designed to be the equivalent of a melee sniper, and in that regard, it's very interesting. But that essentially means that he either kills you before you can react, or you stop him, and then he does nothing. And also you have to use his entire kit in a very, I wouldn't say complicated, you have to just turn around and you're fine. But when you break down a character like Black Panther, who has so much potential in the comics and in the movies, and is so impactful in just how complex of a character Black Panther is as both a mantle and as an actual comic book character, to just boil him down into nothing more than the character who sneaks up behind your healers, dashes twice, throws a couple spears, and then either is now dead or the healer had no fun, is just so sad. In the comics, the mantle of Black Panther is so much more than just an ambushing warrior. The Black Panther is a spiritual leader, king, and protector all in one. So, I think the best way to cover all three roles at once with the Black Panther is to hold him as a strategic character with a stance swapping ability that allows him to take on a more protective role. So please, just bear with me and listen to what I have to offer here. For this Black Panther, I decided to give him two stances, like I mentioned earlier. His first stance and his healing stance is Shaman. There's probably a better word for it, but that's what I came up with. And his secondary stance is Protector. We're going to be starting with his Shaman stance, going over his healing abilities, and then I will swap over to Protector and go over his defensive and or offensive abilities within that. Starting out, with his Shaman stance, his primary fire is Spear Pulse. This is where he wields a pure vibranium spear that fires out a pulse of healing that pierces through allies, healing all of them, and damages the first enemy it hits. And additionally, because it's a spear, I'd like to see his quick melee have a significantly longer reach, similar to what we've seen from Angela's primary. For his secondary fire, we have Spear Plant. This is where Black Panther throws a spear into the ground, creating an area where when anyone with a vibranium mark receives healing, it is mirrored here as well. With that being said, I'm going to pause here for just a second and talk about how I changed vibranium marks. Vibranium marks now, instead of just giving Black Panther a second dash, they instead charge his passive, Kinetic Buildup. Over time, by taking damage, Black Panther will build up 5 kinetic charges. These can be expended using kinetic recovery or expulsion. Additionally, his passive also allows him to make no sound when he moves in his Shaman stance, or allow him to scale up walls in his Protector stance. When a vibranium mark is on someone, any damage they take contributes to the kinetic buildup passive. He can put this on allies and enemies, so he can build it up fairly quickly. Now going back to the Shaman stance, for his first real ability, we have Shared Resources. This is where T'Challa charges his spear for a moment, and for the next 3 shots, explode out in a massive AoE, applying a vibranium mark to allies and enemies, building up his passive when they take damage, and as well as allies gaining healing over time. However, there is no adverse effect for enemies since they're already contributing to his passive. The amount of healing over time that allies gain is directly dependent on how many kinetic charges Black Panther currently has. For his second ability, we have Kinetic Recovery. This is where T'Challa can expend 3 of his kinetic charges to heal himself for half of his maximum HP. Additionally, any ally with a Vibranium Mark instantly recovers half of their maximum HP over time as well. Now, swapping over to his Protector stance. For his primary fire, we have Claws of Wakanda. This is just his current primary fire, fully fleshed out with his melee cancel that he can do. But his secondary fire is Kinetic Arc. This is where T'Challa charges a kick and delivers a massive arc of kinetic energy that severely slows enemies hit by it, while also shutting down their movement abilities for a moment. For his first real ability, we have Spirit Descent. This is where T'Challa dashes forward, kicking an enemy to the ground and stunning them. This is not Black Panther's current dash. This would act similarly to how Blade's dash works, where he kind of bumps the enemy instead of dashing through them. However, continuing, after stunning them and knocking them back, he springs himself into the air, and while mid-air, he has a second ability that he can use to slam into the enemy and deal critical damage, crushing them against the ground, or he can select an ally, give them a Vibranium Mark, and bounce off of them again for additional mobility, essentially allowing him to hop around off of an ally to get out of a position if he's trying to retreat, or if there's someone in the backline that he is stopping, he can keep putting pressure on them, making them regret their life decisions. And for his second real ability, my personal favorite one that I wish he actually had in the game, Kinetic Expulsion. This is where Black Panther expends 3 kinetic charges to emit an AoE that does severe knockback. This does not stun them, it just pushes them away. In a similar way to Invisible Woman's Invisible Physics, where she just throws you away. It would be like that in an AoE around him, like how we see in the Black Panther movie, and I'm sure several times in the comics. However, I'm not nearly as well versed in Black Panther comics. I am currently catching up on the comic issue for Intergalactic Wakanda, what our Black Panther in Marvel Rivals is based off of. But either way, onto his third ability, we have Stance Swap. This is just the ability that you'd have in either form that allows you to switch between Protector or Shaman. And to tie everything up in a nice little bow, we have his ultimate, Bast's Avatar. This is where T'Challa calls upon the spirit of Bast, keeping the Panther Goddess on his back as she spectrally floats off of him, kind of like Godfrey from Elden Ring. And during this time, everyone in the radius constantly has a Vibranium Mark on them, and Black Panther radiates healing constantly. But while he has all 5 charges of his passive set up, if he were to gain another from the damage taken, they'll immediately expel out a comboed version of Kinetic Expulsion and Build Up, taking 2 of his charges, but gaining them back fairly quickly since he would have a constant mark on everyone. Overall, I really like this idea for Black Panther. It's just such an interesting character from any stance that you take for Black Panther. There's literally, in no way is he a bland character, but they gave him such a bland kit, and I hate that. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Obviously, this would never actually come to the game, but I personally really like this redesign. It is, and I tried to keep a lot of what makes Black Panther fun in his Protector stance, making him hyper mobile, but I like this kit significantly more for a character as complex and awesome as King T'Challa. All right, y'all. Those are the 5 rewrites that I made for Marvel Rivals. Overall, I'm pretty proud of the kits. There are some parts that I didn't quite get to touch on, or I feel like I could have touched on better, but overall I think this gets the point across of I don't think we need this many damn duelists in the game. And I know Invis is a strategist, but most of these were duelists. There is definitely a lot of potential for duelists to become some other roles. But either way, I want to know what you guys think of these rewrites in the comments down below. I had a lot of fun trying to remix characters that already exist. Let me know if there's another character you want to see put into a different role. I'll even do joke characters, like I'll try to make a Vanguard kit for Mantis if you want it. I could probably make a Vanguard kit for Black Widow, but let me know what you guys want in the comments down below, and I'll look at your recommendations and try to get you included in the next video. But that'll be it from me, folks. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.